Lisa Carter lived in a quiet neighborhood in Oregon with her 17-year-old son. Ethan, after her husband passed away 5 years ago, life had slowly found a calm rhythm again. She worked from home as an interior designer, spent her evenings cooking, and tried to fill the silence that used to hurt. When Ethan entered high school, the house started to feel alive once more. His friends often visited, sometimes to study, sometimes to play games, and mostly just to hang out. Their laughter brought warmth to the walls that had once echoed with loneliness. Lisa didn't mind. In fact, she loved having them around. She would bake cookies, prepare snacks, and listen to their stories about school and sports. It reminded her of her own teenage years, and she enjoyed being part of their noisy, happy world. At first, she didn't notice how much attention she was getting from them. To her, they were just Ethan's friends, young, polite boys who appreciated a home-cooked meal. But over time, little things began to stand out. They would linger in the kitchen when she was cooking, offering to help even when there was nothing to do. They'd compliment her lasagna, her cookies, and even her sense of style. Sometimes she caught them watching her when they thought she wasn't looking. It wasn't uncomfortable, but it did make her pause. She was 42 and had long stopped thinking of herself in that way. She was a mother, not someone young people looked at twice. Yet their glances told a different story. Ryan, one of Ethan's closest friends, was the first one she truly noticed. He was quiet and well-mannered, the kind of boy every mother liked her son to hang out with. One Saturday afternoon, she brought a tray of cookies to the living room where the boys were watching a game. When she bent down to place the tray on the table, she looked up and saw Ryan staring at her. His expression caught between surprise and nervousness. The moment their eyes met, he turned red and looked away. Lisa smiled softly, pretending she hadn't noticed. It was just a glance, she told herself, but her heart gave a strange little flutter. She didn't want to read too much into it. Maybe he was just embarrassed. Maybe he was lost in thought. Still, the moment stayed with her. After that, she began to see more signs. Another friend, Jason, would always find excuses to talk to her about random things: music, recipes, even college plans. He'd say, "Mrs. Carter, you should start a YouTube channel. Everyone would watch you cook." She laughed it off, but there was something in his tone, an admiration that went beyond simple respect. The others would tease him about it, and he'd blush and change the subject. Ethan, unaware of the deeper meaning, just rolled his eyes at his friends. For him, it was all innocent fun. But Lisa, watching quietly, began to sense that something had shifted. She wasn't flattered in a proud way. It was more like she'd suddenly remembered that she was still seen. After years of focusing on work, chores, and raising her son, she had forgotten how it felt to be noticed. Still, that realization made her uneasy. She didn't want to misinterpret youthful politeness as anything else, nor did she want to encourage any confusion. So she decided to keep her distance, at least a little. She would still host the gatherings, but she would stay in her room more. Let the boys handle their snacks and avoid joining their conversations unless necessary. One Friday evening, the group arrived again for a movie night. Lisa smiled, greeted them all, and returned to the kitchen. Through the half-open door, she heard bits of their conversation. One of them whispered, "Ethan, your mom's amazing. How does she do everything?" Another voice laughed and added, "She's way too cool." "You're lucky, man." Ethan just chuckled. "She's my mom. Guys, relax." They laughed it off. But Lisa felt her face warm. It wasn't uncomfortable, just unexpected. She didn't know if she should feel proud or nervous. When she brought in popcorn later, the room went silent for a second. She noticed it, though she pretended she didn't. The boys quickly started joking again, filling the air with chatter. She smiled, placed the bowls down, and left quietly. In the kitchen, she stood by the counter, staring at the empty tray, wondering why her heart was beating faster than it should. She reminded herself it was nothing, just harmless teenage admiration. But deep down, something stirred, something she hadn't felt in years, a quiet awareness of her own presence. Later that night, after everyone had left, Ethan came into the kitchen to grab a drink. "Thanks for the food, Mom. The guys love coming here," he said casually. She smiled, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. I'm glad they feel at home." He nodded, then added, "They all think you're awesome, you know?" She laughed softly, trying to sound casual. "Do they now?" "Yeah," he said with a grin. "They say you're the nicest mom ever." Lisa smiled, hiding her thoughts behind that familiar motherly warmth. She didn't want him to know that their compliments had affected her more than she wanted to admit. When she finally went to bed, she couldn't sleep. Her mind replayed the evening, the glances, the laughter, the small, innocent compliments. They weren't wrong. She was friendly and kind. But that wasn't why her heart felt uneasy. It was because for the first time in a long time, she felt something new inside her, reminder that she wasn't invisible, that she was still a woman with emotions, still capable of being seen as more than just someone's mother. She lay there in the dark, the soft hum of the refrigerator in the distance, and thought about the years she had spent pushing her own feelings aside. Ever since her husband's passing, she had promised herself she would stay strong for Ethan. Her world had become about schedules, Kale's, and responsibility. There was no space for her own heart. But that night, a quiet thought whispered in her mind maybe it was time to acknowledge that she was still human, still allowed to feel, still allowed to exist as herself. The next morning, she made breakfast as usual. Ethan and his friends were leaving early for soccer practice. As they rushed out, Ryan stopped by the door, holding his sports bag. "Thanks for the cookies, Mrs. Carter," he said, his voice shy but sincere. "You're really kind." She smiled gently. "You're welcome, Ryan. Good luck today." When the door closed behind them, she sighed. The house fell silent again, but it no longer felt as lonely. Lisa walked to the window and looked at the empty street. A breeze moved through the trees, carrying a mix of spring air and something softer, like the start of a change she couldn't quite name. She didn't know what it meant yet. She knew one thing for sure. Life had quietly reminded her that she was still alive inside. Not through grand romance, not through anyone's affection, but through the simple realization that she could still feel warmth in her heart. And as she stood there, smiling faintly to herself, Lisa realized that this small spark of awareness was the beginning of something new, something she hadn't felt in years. After that evening, Lisa started keeping a gentle distance. She didn't want to make anything awkward, not for Ethan and not for his friends. She told herself that she was just being careful, but deep down she knew something inside her had changed. The boys still came over often, filling the house with laughter, music, and the smell of popcorn. Lisa still greeted them with her usual warmth. But she avoided lingering in the living room or sitting with them during their movie nights. Instead, she stayed in the kitchen, pretending to be busy while listening to their happy chatter from a distance. It wasn't that she didn't enjoy their company anymore. She did. It was just that she could sense things she hadn't before. Compliments that once felt innocent now made her feel uneasy. When Jason said, "Mrs. Carter, you always look so nice." Or when Ryan offered to help her carry groceries, she smiled politely, but inside she was unsure how to respond. She didn't want to encourage anything or send the wrong message. She was proud of how well-behaved they were, and she cared for them like she would for any of Ethan's friends. But at the same time, she couldn't ignore how those small moments made her feel something she hadn't felt in a long time. Noticed. Appreciated. Alive. Ethan didn't notice anything unusual. He was busy finishing his final year of high school, juggling soccer practice, exams, and college applications. Most nights he'd come home late, eat whatever his mom had left for him, and fall asleep on the couch. Lisa would cover him with a blanket, smile quietly, and turn off the lights. Watching him grow into an independent young man filled her with pride, but it also reminded her that one day soon, the house would be empty again. One evening, as they sat together after dinner, Ethan surprised her with a question that stopped her heart for a moment. "Mom," he said, his voice calm but serious, "my friends really like you." Lisa looked up from her tea and smiled softly. "That's sweet of them." But Ethan didn't smile back. "No, I mean, they really like you." She tilted her head. "What do you mean?" he sighed. "They talk about you all the time. How kind you are, how you listen, how you make everyone feel safe. They say you're different from other parents." Lisa laughed lightly, trying to brush off the tension. Well, I guess that's a good thing. I'm glad they feel comfortable here. Ethan nodded but didn't look convinced. Yeah, it's good. But sometimes I think they like you a little too much. Lisa froze for a second. Too much, she repeated softly. He shrugged. It's harmless. They just admire you. That's all. She forced a smile, pretending it didn't bother her. They're young boys, Ethan. I'm just your mom. Don't worry about it. But that night, when Ethan went to his room, she sat alone at the kitchen table, staring at her half-empty cup of tea. His words kept echoing in her mind. They like you too much. She didn't feel proud or flattered. Instead, she felt a strange mix of guilt and confusion. Was she doing something wrong? Was she being too open, too friendly? She had always treated them like her own, offering advice, cheering for them at games, listening when they talked about their dreams. She never imagined that any of it could be taken the wrong way. Still, she couldn't deny that the attention had awakened something inside her. It wasn't attraction, but rather a reminder of what it meant to be seen. She hadn't been in love or even close to anyone since her husband passed away. Her world had become about responsibility, bills, work, and parenting. The idea that anyone could see her as more than that felt both strange and dangerous. She didn't want to feel it, yet she couldn't completely ignore it either. The next few weeks passed quietly. Lisa continued her daily routines, work in the morning, errands in the afternoon, and cooking dinner for Ethan in the evening. But in small moments, she caught herself thinking about her life differently. She noticed her reflection more often, paid attention to how she dressed, even put on a bit of perfume before guests arrived. It wasn't for anyone in particular. It was for herself. After years of just surviving, she finally wanted to feel like herself again. One night, she was sitting on the porch reading a book when Ethan came out and sat beside her. The air was cool, and the stars shimmered above them. For a while, they didn't say anything. Then, quietly, he asked, "Mom, do you ever get lonely?" Lisa looked at him, startled. "Why would you ask that?" "I don't know," Ethan said, staring at the dark sky. "You're always smiling, but sometimes it feels like you're hiding something behind it." Lisa tried to find the right words. "I'm fine, sweetheart. I have you. That's all I need." He gave a small smile but shook his head. "You won't have me forever, Mom. I'll go to college next year. You deserve someone who makes you happy." Her chest tightened at his words. She wanted to tell him she was fine, that she didn't need anyone, that she had built her life around being strong. But the truth was, she did feel lonely sometimes, in the quiet after he left for school. In the long nights when there was no one to talk to, in the silence of her own thoughts. Still, she smiled at him and said, "Maybe someday. But right now, you're my world." Ethan leaned over and hugged her. "You've always taken care of me, Mom. Just promise you'll take care of yourself, too." That hug stayed with her long after he went to bed. It was warm, comforting, and heartbreaking all at once. She realized how quickly time was passing, how the little boy she used to hold in her arms was almost grown. And soon, he would have his own life, his own home, his own family. When she went inside, she looked around the living room, the soft light, the photos on the wall, the empty couch. For years, this house had been her whole world. But now it felt like a waiting room for a life she hadn't stepped into yet. The next day, she found herself standing in front of her mirror, really looking at herself. Not as a mother, not as a widow, but as a woman. There were fine lines around her eyes, a few strands of gray in her hair, but there was still warmth, still light. She smiled faintly. For the first time in years, she didn't see loss. She saw strength. That weekend, when Ethan's friends came over again, she welcomed them like always. The boys laughed, joked, and filled the house with energy. But Lisa didn't feel uneasy anymore. She knew where she stood. She was kind because it was in her nature, not because she needed attention. She was warm because her heart was still capable of love, the quiet kind, the human kind. As she watched them all teasing Ethan in the living room, Lisa felt a sense of peace. Her life wasn't perfect, but it was real. And somewhere deep inside, she knew that the story of her heart wasn't over yet. It was just changing. That night, when Ethan thanked her again for hosting his friends, She smiled, kissed his forehead, and whispered, "You make me proud every single day." He grinned and said, "I learned from the best." And for the first time in a long while, Lisa didn't feel lonely at all. She felt whole. Ethan's 18th birthday arrived on a warm Saturday evening in early June. The house, which had once been filled with quiet routines, was now alive with music, laughter, and the sound of celebration. Balloons hung in the corners, the kitchen smelled of Lisa's famous lasagna, and the backyard glowed with string lights that Ethan had helped her put up. She had spent the whole day cooking and decorating, wanting to make this night perfect for him. Ethan's friends started arriving just before sunset. They brought gifts, snacks, and their usual energy that filled every empty corner of the house. Lisa smiled as she welcomed them in, though a familiar flutter of nervousness stirred inside her. It wasn't discomfort, just awareness. She knew that many of them admired her, not in a childish way, but in the gentle, respectful way young people sometimes admired those who had lived a little more than they had. She handled it with quiet grace, as she always did. "Mrs. Carter, this looks amazing," Jason said, walking in with a grin. "You outdid yourself." Lisa laughed softly. "Thank you, Jason, but it's Ethan's day, not mine." Ryan followed behind him, carrying a gift bag and smiling shyly. "Happy birthday, Ethan, and I'm Mrs. Carter. That smells incredible." "Thank you, Ryan," she said kindly. "You boys just enjoy yourselves." The evening went by quickly. Laughter echoed through the house. The music played softly. And Lisa watched from the kitchen as Ethan and his friends joked around, teasing one another, happy and carefree. It made her heart swell with pride. Her son had grown into a kind, confident young man, surrounded by good friends. For a moment, she forgot her worries and simply enjoyed watching him. When it was time for cake, everyone gathered around the table. Lisa brought out the chocolate cake she'd baked herself, Ethan's favorite. And everyone began to sing. Ethan's eyes sparkled as he looked around the room. And when he blew out the candles, he turned to his mom with a warm smile. "Thanks, Mom, for everything." Lisa's chest tightened at his words. She smiled, brushing a tear that had appeared in her eyes. "Always, sweetheart, always." After the cake and presents, the group moved to the living room to watch a movie. Lisa quietly cleaned up in the kitchen, humming to herself. She didn't notice that Ethan was watching her from the other room, his friends busy with snacks and laughter. He saw her moving gracefully, tidying up with her usual calm care. For a moment, he thought about how much she had done for him over the years, every meal, every late-night talk, every sacrifice. She had given up so much for him, and now he was about to leave for college. A wave of gratitude and sadness washed over him. By the time the guests left that night, the house was quiet again. Only the faint hum of the refrigerator and the soft ticking of the clock filled the silence. Ethan stayed behind in the kitchen, helping his mom clean the dishes. They worked quietly side by side for a while, comfortable in the stillness. "Did you have fun?" Lisa asked softly, drying a plate. "Yeah," Ethan said with a smile. "It was great. Thanks for doing all this. You don't have to thank me. You only turn 18 once." He nodded, leaning against the counter. Then, after a pause, he said something unexpected. "Mom, do you ever feel lonely?" Lisa froze, the dish towel in her hand. She turned to him, her expression gentle but surprised. "Why would you ask that?" "I don't know," he said, looking down. "You're always happy, always smiling. But sometimes it feels like you're putting on a brave face." Her heart softened. He was more observant than she thought. "I'm fine, honey. I have you. That's enough." He hesitated, then spoke again, his tone quieter now. "You won't have me forever, Mom. I'll be in college soon. You deserve someone too. Someone who makes you happy." Lisa felt her throat tighten. She wanted to tell him that she was fine, that she didn't need anyone. But deep down, she knew he was right. There were nights when the silence in the house was too heavy, when she longed for someone to talk to, someone who understood her heart. But she didn't want Ethan to worry about that. So she smiled faintly and said, "Maybe one day. But right now, seeing you happy makes me happy." He walked over and hugged her tightly. "You're the best mom ever." Lisa held him close, her eyes closing as she breathed in the scent of his shampoo, the same kind he'd used since he was 12. For a moment, she wished she could freeze time, keep him here, safe, young, and still hers. But time never stopped for anyone. When he pulled away, he smiled and said, "Promise me something." "What's that?" she asked softly. "When I leave, promise you won't just sit here alone. Go out, meet people, live your life. You've spent so much time taking care of me. It's time someone takes care of you." Her chest ached at his words. "I promise," she whispered. That night, after Ethan went to bed, Lisa sat by the window, staring out at the quiet street. The party lights still glowed faintly in the backyard, swaying in the breeze. She thought about his words over and over. "You deserve someone who makes you happy." They lingered in her heart like a quiet echo. She thought about her life, the years that had passed since her husband died, the way she had built everything around her son. Every smile, every plan, every decision, it had all been for Ethan. But now, as he grew older and began stepping into his own life, she realized that she needed to rediscover her own. Not through anyone else's affection, but through remembering who she was before life became about survival. The next morning, Lisa woke early. The house was still. She made coffee and sat on the porch as the sun rose, the golden light touching the trees. For the first time in a long while, she felt calm, not because everything was perfect, but because she understood something new. Love wasn't always about romance or longing. Sometimes it was about letting go, about giving someone wings and being strong enough to watch them fly. When Ethan came downstairs later, she greeted him with her usual warm smile. "Good morning, birthday boy," he grinned, rubbing his eyes. "Morning, Mom." As they ate breakfast together, the air between them felt lighter, full of unspoken understanding. Ethan was ready to face his future, and Lisa was beginning to find peace with her past. She looked at her son, the same boy who used to hold her hand while crossing the street, and realized that every sacrifice, every lonely night had led to this moment of quiet pride. She knew her life was entering a new chapter. And while the idea of an empty house scared her, it also made her heart beat with quiet hope. Maybe she would travel. Maybe she'd pick up painting again. Maybe one day she'd meet someone new. But for now, sitting across from her son, Lisa felt full of love, gratitude, and something she hadn't felt in years: peace. The party was over, but a new story had begun. And for Lisa, that was enough. Weeks passed after Ethan's birthday, and the house slowly returned to its usual calm rhythm. The decorations were gone, the music had faded, and the laughter that once filled the rooms was now a quiet memory. Ethan was busy with his final exams and college plans, often out with his friends or studying at the library. Lisa, on the other hand, found herself adjusting to the silence again. It wasn't the heavy silence she once feared. It was softer now, peaceful, but tinged with a quiet ache. She had always known this day would come, the moment when her son would start building his own life. Still, it felt strange to sit at the kitchen table and realize how quickly time had passed. One Friday evening, Ethan came home with Ryan, his polite and thoughtful friend. Lisa hadn't seen Ryan much since the birthday party, and she was pleasantly surprised when he greeted her with a warm smile. "Hi, Mrs. Carter," he said, setting his bag down. "I hope it's okay we hang out here for a bit. We're working on a project." "Course," Lisa replied kindly. "You boys know this house is always open." She prepared them some lemonade and sandwiches, just like she used to. Watching them laugh and talk brought back old memories, all those weekends when Ethan's friends filled her home with energy. But this time she noticed how different everything felt. Ethan was more mature now, his shoulders broader, his tone more confident. And Ryan wasn't the shy boy he used to be. He spoke more easily, with a calmness that reminded her of someone growing into adulthood. As the evening went on, Lisa found herself sitting with them for a while, listening as they discussed their project. They were talking about future plans, dreams, and what life might look like after graduation. "I'm not sure what I'll study yet," Ryan said. "Maybe engineering. My parents think it's practical." Lisa smiled. "You're young. You have time to figure it out. Just make sure you do something that makes you proud, not just what others expect." Ryan looked at her for a moment, thoughtful. "You always say things that make sense, Mrs. Carter. You really care, don't you?" "I try to," she said softly. "Life's too short not to care." They worked late into the night. Around 10, Ethan yawned and stretched. "I'm exhausted. I'm going to take a quick shower," he said, heading upstairs. That left Lisa and Ryan alone in the quiet living room. She began gathering the empty glasses, but Ryan stood up quickly. "I'll help," he offered. "You don't have to," she said with a smile. "I want to," he replied, taking a few plates and following her to the kitchen. They worked in silence for a few minutes, the only sound being the gentle clinking of dishes and the hum of the dishwasher. Then, in a low voice, Ryan said, "Mrs. Carter, can I tell you something?" Lisa turned slightly, curious. "Of course." He hesitated, then spoke softly. "You've helped me more than you know. When my parents were fighting last year, I used to come here just to feel calm again. You'd always smile and ask how I was doing even when I didn't know how to answer. You made me feel like things were going to be okay." Lisa's heart tightened. She hadn't known that. She had just been kind the way she always tried to be. But hearing his words made her realize how deeply small gestures could matter. She smiled gently. "I'm glad I could help, Ryan. Sometimes all we need is someone who listens." He nodded. "You did more than listen. You made me believe that good people still exist." The words lingered in the air for a moment. There was nothing uncomfortable about them, just sincerity and warmth. Lisa felt tears sting her eyes, but she quickly blinked them away. "You're a good kid, Ryan," she said softly. "You'll do well in life." When Ethan came back downstairs, everything felt normal again. They watched a short movie before Ryan left for home. Before stepping out, he turned to Lisa and said, "Thank you for everything, Mrs. Carter." His voice carried quiet emotion. And then he was gone. That night, Lisa stood by the window, looking at the faint glow of the streetlights outside. The breeze carried the scent of spring through the open window, and she wrapped her arms around herself, lost in thought. The conversation with Ryan replayed in her mind. It reminded her that kindness had power, not the kind that came from attention or admiration, but the kind that healed unseen wounds. She realized that her warmth had touched people without her even noticing. As the days passed, Lisa noticed that Ethan spent more time outside the house. He was preparing for college, visiting campuses, spending evenings with friends. The house grew quieter again, and though part of her missed the noise, another part of her was learning to enjoy the peace. She read more, took walks around the neighborhood, even joined a local art class, something she hadn't done since her 20s. Slowly, she was building a life that belonged to her, not just the version of herself that existed for someone else. One evening, Ethan returned home later than usual. He found his mom sitting on the porch, sketchbook in hand, drawing the sunset. "Hey, Mom," he said, sitting beside her. "You've been busy lately," she smiled. "Trying new things. It feels good." He looked at her and grinned. "You seem happier." "I think I am," she admitted. "Maybe for the first time in a long time." Ethan leaned back, watching the colors fade in the sky. "Ryan told me he really looks up to you," he said casually. "Said you helped him through a tough time." Lisa smiled softly. "He's a good kid. I'm proud of how far he's come." Eth nodded. "You have that effect on people. You make them feel safe." His words were simple, but they touched her heart deeply. She looked at her son, now almost a man, and realized he had grown into everything she had hoped he would be: kind, honest, and full of empathy. In that moment, she felt something shift inside her. The loneliness she once carried was no longer heavy. It had turned into something gentler, a quiet kind of love that came from acceptance. The next morning, else the sun rose, Lisa brewed her coffee and stood by the window. She thought about the years behind her, the loss, the rebuilding, the unexpected attention, and the soft rediscovery of herself. Every moment, good and bad, had brought her here to this calm, steady peace. She didn't need anyone's admiration. She didn't need to chase what was gone. Her worth wasn't measured by who looked at her, but by the lives she had touched along the way. When Ethan came downstairs, half asleep and smiling, she handed him a cup of coffee. Big day ahead, she asked. He nodded. College interview. You'll do great, she said confidently. You always do. As he left for the day, she watched him from the doorway, her heart full. The boy who once needed her for everything was now ready to face the world. And she, the woman who once thought her story was over, had quietly found a new beginning. Lisa turned back toward the house, sunlight pouring through the windows, and smiled to herself. Her life wasn't lonely anymore. It was full of memories, lessons, and a new kind of hope. Because in rediscovering love for others, she had finally rediscovered love for herself.
The rain had been falling all evening when Emily Carter heard a sudden knock on her Seattle apartment door, a sound so unexpected that it pulled her out of her quiet routine and made her heart jump, because she had been living a calm, almost lonely life since her breakup with Daniel Hayes 2 years earlier, and she never imagined anything from that past would ever come back. When she opened the door, she froze completely. Standing there in the doorway, soaked from the rain and looking unsure, was Ethan Hayes, Daniel's son, someone she had once known as a polite, warm teenager who used to visit during holidays, and now he was 25, taller, older, with gentle brown eyes that held a mix of worry and exhaustion. Emily felt a rush of memories mixed with surprise, but before she could process it, Ethan gave a small, apologetic smile and said he was sorry for coming without calling, that he needed advice and didn't know who else to go to, and hearing that shook her more than the rain outside because she realized he had come to her, of all people, when he was struggling. She stepped aside quickly, letting him in, noticing how the rain had soaked through his clothes as he walked to her couch, and although she told herself to stay calm, she couldn't ignore the strange emotion rising inside her, something warm and nervous at the same time. She made him tea the way she used to back when she and Daniel were together, and the moment she handed the mug to Ethan, she noticed just how much he had changed. He wasn't the shy, quiet boy anymore, he was a grown man carrying some heavy burden she could see in his eyes. As he sat down, he looked around the apartment like it held pieces of old memories, then finally met her gaze and admitted softly that things in his life felt confusing. His father was distant, life felt overwhelming, and he didn't know who to trust. Emily felt a familiar ache, because she knew exactly what Daniel's emotional distance felt like, and hearing Ethan speak with such honesty made her chest tighten with sympathy. In that moment, all the walls she had built around her heart since the breakup seemed to lower just a little, because Ethan wasn't there to reopen old wounds, he was there because he believed she could help. As she listened to him try to explain what he was going through, she felt something unexpected, a connection that didn't belong to the past but seemed to be forming right there in her small living room. She tried not to show how surprised she was by the comfort she felt being near him again, especially because he looked at her with an openness that felt warmer than anything she had felt in a long time. And although the rain kept tapping at the windows, the apartment felt strangely quiet, like something important had settled into the space between them. By the time Ethan finally took a sip of his tea, Emily felt that the night had already shifted in a way she couldn't name. She didn't know what kind of advice he needed or what he would tell her next, but she could feel that the simple act of him knocking on her door had changed something inside her life, something she wasn't ready to admit yet. She sat beside him, not too close but close enough to notice the quiet way he breathed, the tired curve of his shoulders, and she wondered why fate had brought him to her doorstep on a rainy night after years of silence. And as she waited for him to explain the real reason he came, Emily realized that the story of her quiet life had just taken a turn she never saw coming, and that Ethan Hayes' unexpected visit was only the beginning of something she didn't fully understand, something emotional, something delicate, something she could feel but couldn't yet describe, a moment that felt like the soft, unpredictable start of a new chapter she wasn't ready for yet but couldn't walk away from either. Ethan sat on the couch with the warm cup between his hands, and as the rain softened outside, he started talking in a way Emily had never heard from him before, fast and honest. Like he had been holding everything inside for months, and she listened carefully, feeling the weight behind every word he spoke. He told her he felt lost, his job wasn't giving him joy, his friendships felt distant, and the pressure of always trying to live up to his father's expectations had finally caught up with him, leaving him confused about who he wanted to be. Emily watched him closely, noticing how his confident appearance didn't match the pain in his eyes, and it struck her how much he must have carried without telling anyone. She encouraged him gently, asking small questions that helped him open up more, and he talked about how he always admired her calmness, her way of understanding emotions, something he never felt from his father. Emily felt a strange warmth at his words, not romantic exactly, but something tender, something that made her feel seen in a way she hadn't in years. They talked for a long time, moving from his struggles to memories of the past, and even though those memories included Daniel, nothing felt heavy or awkward. Instead, it felt like two people reconnecting in a space made safe by honesty. As he spoke, there were moments when Ethan's voice softened, when he looked at her like her presence alone was giving him comfort, and each time, Emily felt her heart shift just a little more, as if emotions she had pushed aside long ago were quietly returning. At one point, when Emily leaned forward to hand him his mug after refilling it, their fingers brushed, just for a second, but it was enough to bring a sudden, quiet stillness between them, the kind that made both of them aware of something they hadn't named yet. Ethan didn't move away quickly this time. Instead, he held her gaze, and the warmth in his eyes made Emily's breath catch, because she wasn't prepared for the gentle intensity she saw there, something different from the confused boy she once knew. She looked away first, trying to steady herself, reminding her heart that this was complicated, that he was here because he needed guidance, not because of anything else, but the air in the room felt different now, softer, warmer, filled with something unspoken. Ethan continued talking, but even as he spoke about his worries, Emily could sense the shift between them, a quiet new layer of awareness, as if they were both stepping onto unfamiliar emotional ground without meaning to. He told her how lonely he had felt lately, how he had been trying to figure out life on his own, and how something inside him pushed him toward her door tonight, trusting she would understand him in a way others wouldn't. Emily felt a gentle ache at that, not sadness but a deep empathy, because she knew what it meant to feel misunderstood, and hearing him say he trusted her so strongly stirred something in her chest she didn't want to examine too closely. They fell into a softer, more relaxed conversation after that, sharing small laughs that eased the heaviness, and with each smile, Emily noticed how Ethan's face brightened, how his shoulders relaxed, and how the room slowly became lighter, as if the night was giving them space to breathe again. But beneath that calm, something emotional and fragile lingered, something neither of them addressed directly but both seemed to feel. When Ethan looked at her again, really looked, his eyes held an expression she couldn't quite name, something gentle, grateful, and almost admiring, and she had to glance away to steady the sudden flutter in her heart. She told herself it was just the moment, the rain, the intimacy of sharing deep truths, but she also knew that this connection, whatever it was, wasn't shallow. It was real, unexpected, and quietly powerful. Just then, his phone buzzed loudly on the table, breaking the softness between them like a sudden cold draft. He checked the screen, and his expression changed instantly, the warmth replaced by frustration and something that looked almost like dread. "It's Dad," he said quietly, rubbing his forehead, and the moment he said it, Emily felt her chest tighten. It wasn't jealousy or resentment. She simply felt the past pulling at the present, a reminder that life was more complicated than the peaceful moment they had just shared. Ethan stared at the phone but didn't reply, letting it buzz again, then fall silent. Emily waited, not wanting to pressure him, but she felt the tension rise in the room, not between them, but around them, like the night itself had shifted again. Ethan sighed heavily, looking tired in a way that made Emily want to comfort him, but she stayed still, giving him space to choose what he needed. "I don't want to talk to him right now," he said softly. "Not when I'm finally feeling better." The way he said better made Emily's heart thump because she knew he meant he felt better with her, and even though she tried to stay neutral, she couldn't deny the quiet happiness that rose inside her. But before she could say anything, before she could help him sort through the emotions growing between them, the buzz of the phone faded into the quiet of the apartment, leaving them sitting there in a moment that felt fragile and unfinished, as if fate was holding its breath, waiting for what would come next. The apartment felt heavy with unspoken feelings as Ethan and Emily sat across from each other, the rain outside a soft rhythm against the windows, and although they had been talking about his problems and his life, now something more personal and fragile hovered in the space between them, a quiet awareness neither dared to name aloud but both could feel in every glance, every small movement. Ethan shifted slightly on the couch, not leaving, not turning away, and said quietly that he knew this might sound strange, but being there with Emily tonight felt different, like a safe place he hadn't found anywhere else, and his voice carried a sincerity that made Emily's chest tighten and her heart beat faster in ways she hadn't expected, because she had always cared about him as Daniel's son, but this was something else, something new and complicated that stirred feelings she thought she had buried after the breakup with Daniel. She tried to remind herself of the reasons this could never happen, of the awkwardness of the situation, of the fact that Ethan had come seeking advice and guidance, not romance, but as she looked at him, she saw a man who was honest, vulnerable, and kind in a way that drew her closer emotionally, making her want to reach out, to touch, to comfort him without crossing the invisible line she kept reminding herself existed. Ethan's gaze lingered on her, soft but intense, and when he moved his hand slightly, brushing against hers for a second, the moment stretched longer than it should, and Emily felt the warmth of his touch ripple through her like an unexpected current, awakening emotions she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years, a mix of longing, protectiveness, and quiet curiosity about where this connection could lead if they were brave enough to acknowledge it. She opened her mouth to say something, to warn him, to remind them both of the boundaries, but no words came because her heart had caught on to something she couldn't put into sentences yet, something more than friendship, more than familiarity, something intimate without being physical, a delicate, emotional bond forming quietly, almost invisibly. Ethan noticed her hesitation and whispered that he didn't expect to feel this way, that he had only come for advice, but now everything seemed different, the room charged with a soft tension that wasn't uncomfortable but impossible to ignore. Emily's mind raced as she considered the implications, knowing this was complicated, that feelings like this could lead to confusion, heartbreak, or awkwardness, yet she couldn't deny the way her chest warmed when he looked at her, the quiet thrill of being seen and understood by someone who mattered deeply. She reminded herself of the past, of Daniel's presence in their lives, of the years that separated their experiences, but even so, she felt drawn in, held by the honesty and the emotional depth of the moment, and she realized that she had missed this kind of connection, this kind of intensity, in her life for a long time. Ethan, sensing her internal struggle, leaned back slightly but didn't let go, his eyes still on hers, and said softly that he knew she might think he was wrong or confused, but he had never felt so safe talking to anyone, never felt understood like this, and the vulnerability in his voice made Emily feel protective, tender, and unreasonably hopeful all at once, a mix she couldn't name but could feel in every pulse of her body. She tried to focus on his words, on the practical side of helping him navigate his life, but the emotional undercurrent kept pulling at her, reminding her that human connections often defied reason, that hearts didn't follow rules, and that sometimes moments like this were rare and worth noticing even if they were complicated. Then, suddenly, Ethan's phone buzzed again, breaking the soft, intimate bubble they had formed, and he picked it up reluctantly, his face darkening as he saw it was his father, Daniel, calling, the timing cruel and sharp, slicing through the quiet they had built. He sighed, setting the phone down without answering, and admitted quietly that his father had a way of always showing up at the wrong moment, that he felt torn between respecting his father and embracing the rare comfort he felt in Emily's presence, and Emily nodded, understanding completely, because she knew all too well what it was like to be caught between past ties and present emotions. She reached out instinctively, brushing his hand lightly, a gesture of reassurance and shared understanding, and he looked at her with something close to awe, as if the simple touch confirmed that he was not alone, that someone cared for him in the way he had been craving without realizing it. The tension in the room eased slightly, replaced by a quiet, charged calm, a delicate intimacy that neither words nor actions could fully define but that both recognized in their hearts, a recognition that what they were feeling was real and significant, even if it was fragile and complicated. They sat there for a long time, breathing in the shared space, talking intermittently about small things, laughter mixing with seriousness, building trust and emotional closeness, and Emily realized that in these few hours, something had changed irrevocably, the way they saw each other, the way their hearts connected, the soft lines between guidance, care, and unexpected attraction had blurred just enough to awaken hope, warmth, and curiosity about what could happen next, and yet, neither of them spoke directly about it, respecting the fragility of the moment, savoring it quietly. And just as Emily began to gather the courage to say something about this strange, beautiful shift, a sudden sharp knock on her apartment door startled them both, breaking the quiet intimacy instantly, and when they froze, the shared glance between them was enough to convey the sudden tension, the return of reality, and the weight of the past ready to intrude on the delicate present. Ethan's jaw tightened, his expression shifting from the calm warmth he had carried for hours to one of concern and determination, and Emily felt her chest tighten as she realized the knock meant something unavoidable, something external that could disrupt the fragile emotional connection they had nurtured tonight, making them both aware that life was complicated, emotions were dangerous, and the heart had a way of surprising them when they least expected it. The knock came again, louder this time, echoing in the small apartment, and Ethan muttered quietly, almost to himself, that it was Daniel, her ex and his father, and Emily's breath caught at the sound, knowing that the delicate space they had just created was about to be tested by reality, by the past walking right to her doorstep, and the moment ended suspended between longing, fear, and the unspoken promise of what might unfold next. The knocking on Emily's apartment door echoed through the quiet space, and her heart raced as she realized it was Daniel, her ex, standing outside, a reminder of the past intruding on the fragile moment she had shared with Ethan, and she felt a sudden wave of tension, uncertainty, and unspoken questions all at once, while Ethan's expression tightened with concern, knowing that the presence of his father could complicate everything they had begun to feel tonight, yet he stayed calm, ready to face the situation without letting anger or fear control him. Emily opened the door just slightly, enough to see Daniel's familiar face, older, tired, and careful, his eyes showing surprise at seeing both her and Ethan there together, and she felt a strange mix of old memories and present emotions stirring inside her, a cocktail of past heartbreak, lingering respect, and a hint of curiosity about how this encounter would unfold. Daniel's voice was gentle, cautious, and a little awkward as he apologized for appearing unexpectedly, claiming he only wanted to check on Ethan, and Emily listened carefully, aware of the delicate emotional balance in the room, feeling protective of the young man she had been helping tonight, and noticing how grown-up and composed Ethan looked despite the sudden tension. Ethan, standing tall but composed, spoke firmly, telling his father that he was no longer a child to be controlled and that he had sought advice from Emily because he trusted her judgment, and the strength and honesty in his voice made Emily's chest swell with pride and a quiet admiration, seeing the man he had become while also feeling the lingering emotional connection that had grown between them in the past hours. Daniel studied both their faces slowly, sensing the subtle tension but choosing not to push, and finally said he would give them space, reminding Ethan to call him when he was ready, then stepped back, leaving the hallway quiet again, and Emily closed the door slowly, her breath shaky, realizing that the past had come, acknowledged its presence, and then quietly receded, leaving room for the present to continue. Ethan turned to her, his eyes softening, vulnerability returning to his gaze as he apologized for dragging the past into the delicate moment they had shared, and Emily smiled gently, telling him it was okay, that sometimes life forced us to confront old ties before we could move forward, and in that instant, she felt the room relax, the heavy tension dissolve, and a quiet intimacy settle around them, stronger and warmer than before. They moved closer, not physically rushed but emotionally, sharing quiet words, soft smiles, and lingering glances, the atmosphere filled with trust, unspoken feelings, and the gentle acknowledgement that what had started as a simple visit for advice had transformed into a connection neither expected but both felt deeply, a bond woven through honesty, empathy, and the subtle spark of attraction that didn't break any rules but hinted at something tender, delicate, and promising. Emily realized that tonight had brought clarity, not chaos, teaching her that feelings don't always follow logic, that hearts can surprise even when the mind resists, and that sometimes the most profound moments happen quietly, in small gestures, shared silences, and the courage to face both past and present at the same time. Ethan, sensing her understanding, reached out slowly, brushing her hand gently, not demanding anything, just acknowledging the unspoken, and Emily felt warmth spread through her chest, a quiet, steady, and comforting spark that told her they had crossed an invisible boundary into something meaningful, respectful, and safe, yet undeniably intimate. They sat there in the soft glow of the apartment lights, listening to the fading rain, their conversation turning from serious matters to lighter memories, laughter mixing with soft confessions, And each moment added layers to the bond that had unexpectedly grown tonight, a bond of trust, understanding, and the gentle promise of emotional closeness that neither had anticipated when Ethan first knocked on her door. Emily looked at him and realized she hadn't felt this alive in years, not just from excitement but from the deep, resonant connection of hearts meeting honestly, and Ethan, noticing the quiet shift in her expression, smiled with relief, gratitude, and something more profound that shimmered just beneath the surface, a warmth neither words nor explanations could fully capture. There was no rush, no dramatic confession, only a soft, mutual recognition that their relationship had changed in a meaningful way, that the past had been faced and set aside respectfully, and that the future, while uncertain, held a gentle promise, a path they could explore carefully together, guided by honesty, respect, and the shared emotional bond they had nurtured tonight. As the night deepened and the rain finally ceased, Emily and Ethan sat close enough to feel the subtle presence of the other, yet distant enough to honor the fragile balance, their hearts quietly acknowledging the truth. Sometimes the most powerful connections happen unexpectedly, under ordinary circumstances, and grow through understanding, trust, and the courage to embrace what life offers without forcing it, and tonight, they had discovered that for themselves, in a way that was tender, mature, emotional, and utterly unforgettable.